Hello everyone, this is Priyakshi from evreporter.com. I hope you are all keeping safe in this difficult time and welcome to this session. In this session, we are going to cover the impact of COVID-19 on the Indian EV ecosystem. So the outline of the session will be divided into two parts. In the first part, we will discuss about the impact on the Indian ecosystem overall and what the post-COVID era looks like for the industry. We would also like to hear our experts' views on how the OEMs, especially the startups, can respond to this crisis and stay afloat. And in the second session, we'll talk about the current spread of lithium ion battery supply chain and how the situation may pan out for India for our procurement of batteries and raw materials. In this session, I'm joined by Mr. Uday Sankar Yaramali. He's a consultant in the EV domain and founder of USPI Consulting. Mr. Uday has a decade of experience in the automotive industry in various capacities. He founded USPI Consulting to facilitate the creation of sustainable ecosystem for EV adoption in India, and he's working from all quarters to make it happen. So welcome Uday, and thanks for taking the time.
Hi, good morning, Priyakshi. It's always a pleasure, talking on such subjects. I mean, it keeps me, at speed with myself and at speed with what is happening outside. So, would be a pleasure and look forward to an exciting discussion.
Right. So let's, without any delays, Uday, let's get started with the first topic. So if we analyze the overall impact and if we talk about the segments, so general perception or the feedback I'm gathering from the industry is that the light electric vehicles for personal transport will ultimately benefit from the crisis as people will look for economical personal mobility options and maybe shy away from shared mobility for a while. So what is your take on this? How do you think the market is going to respond to different segments of vehicles?
Okay, firstly, let me say that yes, COVID has been a fairly big catastrophe, if I can use that word, across the globe. I think all countries, all segments of people have been affected by it alike. Probably the first of its kind in the history of human existence that has put the entire world at a standstill. So, however, the good news is that someday or the other this will end. Either you call it through herd immunity or through inventing a vaccine for COVID. This has to end someday or the other, and therefore, whatever setbacks we are talking of, it will be temporary. So that is the first thing which I would like to clarify from my end, and I strongly believe that the setback will only be temporary. Now, having said that, I agree with what you said. Yes, the smaller vehicles and the personal mobility segment will certainly get a slightly better boost as compared to the shared mobility space in the short run. And that short run could be anywhere between 3 to 6 months or even 6 to 12 months, depending on how the situation will pan out post-COVID. However, one of the things we should not be surprised is even the mass mobility segment can utilize this time as a preparatory slot for them to gear up, so that once the market opens up and once we believe that the world is done away with COVID, then certainly they should be in for the big race. So while in the short run, from a market perspective, the smaller vehicles or the light segment could benefit, but in the long run, certainly this can be an incubation period for the larger vehicles and the shared mobility space to prep up themselves and create a good future for themselves.
Okay. If we talk about different vehicle segments, like comparing two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and four-wheelers, so what do you think is going to gain momentum in the short term, at least in the aftermath of COVID?
See, I believe that there will certainly be a setback for at least 2 to 3 months across the auto industry. However, when you look at the specific segments, I think given the scare of the spread of the virus and the social distancing that people are generally, talking about too much in these days, I believe the personal mobility space will certainly gain momentum. So anyone who's got a vehicle would probably prefer to go for a second vehicle for family members, a regular commute, and therefore two-wheeler would certainly be the most preferred option.
Right.
And the entry-level four-wheelers could be the next option, all on the personal space. And therefore, I see that two-wheelers and the entry-level four-wheeler segment could be the quick or the next two big things up for growth much faster post the COVID era. However, we should also not discount the aspect of the used vehicles, the used car space to get a big boost from this. Because for someone who would like to buy a four-wheeler, it can always be a choice between a new small car or a used sedan or let's say a premium hatchback or a SUV. And I don't think people would really shy away from going for a used vehicle as long as they're getting the economic value. And remember, this phenomenon will be temporary. So going forward, people will have to get used to a shared mobility model or using the public transport for their day-to-day commute. And therefore, considering that the scenario will be temporary, could be at best for 2 to 3 years, we would not be surprised if the common consumer mindset could probably tend towards used cars and therefore giving the used car segment a boost post-COVID. So these are my quick views. But yes, passenger car segment will take its time to rebound, but it will come back to normal. And the commercial vehicle segment, however, depend on the boost that the government gives through spends on infrastructure. But otherwise, I see dark days ahead for the commercial vehicle segment, at least for the next 1 to 2 years.
Okay. So, but if we talk about EV specifically, then the general view is the electric two-wheelers have a good opportunity here to, make inroads into our life, right? Because if you look at overall...
Yes. So sorry?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, no, like I said, naturally, in the two-wheeler space, provided the electric two-wheelers are able to offer a sensible value proposition and a good value for money on a total cost of ownership basis.
Right.
I think the consumer mindset will tend to go towards electric two-wheelers against conventional IC engine two-wheeler. Now, some statistics, if we look at, it says that even today, electric two-wheeler costs either as much as or probably 5 to 10% more than a conventional two-wheeler over the life cycle of the product. Okay. So that is something which I think the product has to offer as a value proposition to the consumer. And if I believe that if the value proposition is really seen by the end consumer, the mass adoption will happen. Otherwise, adoption will still happen, but it will be restricted to people who are either tech savvy or essentially the early adopters will continue to go for electric two-wheelers. But for mass adoption, matching the value proposition on a total cost of ownership basis will be critical.
Right, right. So if we talk from the OEM's point of view, so in the ecosystem, there are legacy automakers who started making EVs as an extension to their existing IC business. And then there are pure play EV startups. So as the lockdown is lifting slowly and the factories are buzzing again, one view is that the legacy automakers might defer their EV investments and they start refocusing on their core IC business, at least in the medium term, to revive themselves. Like recently I read a report that Piaggio, that was supposed to be making somewhere around 5,000 electric three-wheelers this year, they are going to downsize that plan and focus on the diesel and CNG three-wheelers. So do you think other automakers will follow this trend? How is the company's response going to differ, legacy automakers versus EV startups?
See, I would like to, again, talk about it in two perspectives. Right. One, let me take the case of the EV startups to begin with. Okay. For EV startups, it's completely a question of their existence and survival. So they have no choice but to up the ante post-COVID to make sure that they survive in the business and they make worth for whatever investments they've made so far in this in their respective businesses so far. However, for the legacy automakers, they have a choice. Now, their decision could essentially depend upon the amount of money that they're sitting on right now and their ability to therefore invest that capital in something like an EV program, which is more futuristic, versus focusing on the here and now and making sure that they get back to their normal sales numbers. Now, there, I think certainly the big automakers have got an advantage, and whatever said and done, we have to remember the fact that the impact of COVID will certainly be temporary. And I personally don't think that it would extend beyond, let's say, 9 months or the current year in the perspective of the automotive industry specifically. So 1 year at best could be the setback that the EV programs can face from the automakers. At the same time, it also depends on at what stage the programs are. Let's say if the program is at a concept stage, it could probably be the most likely candidate to be deferred. But if the program has already reached, let's say, 50% or 60% of the development, if it has cleared 50 or 60% of the development stages, I don't think any automaker would like to defer the program. So it depends. Therefore, I don't think there can be a straight answer to this. It clearly depends on the ability of the automaker to spend the money right now, and definitely their strategic plans and the strategic focus that they have on the EV segment, and at what stage each of their EV programs are. I think these are some of the key factors that will determine whether an automaker would decide to defer their plans on EVs or continue to do it despite the external scenario and make sure that they're ready with the product in, let's say, 3 to 6 months time.
Okay. But if we talk about EV startups specifically, because there are a lot of startups also in the two-wheeler space that who announced products like 2 years, 3 years ago, but still haven't seen them come to the market. So I suppose these startups, they operate with limited means, and this is an unexpected, unprecedented scenario. So any specific advice from your side for them to stay afloat, basically? How do they go face this crisis, the EV startups specifically?
Right. See, one of the things, and I don't mean anything against anyone, or so let me make that disclaimer upfront. But one of the things that I've generally observed in the startups is, let's say if there are 100 startups, probably 10 or maybe at best 20 of them are really focusing on innovation and focusing on the core product as a value offering. The rest of the startups are essentially trying to do an assembly job. This has been my observation, and therefore what is happening is the ability of the startup to preserve the value in their offering will become limited the moment you move away from innovation and try to just get into manufacturing and make sure that your product is out on the roads. So I don't call it an advice, but I think my view on the current situation for startups is as follows. One, startups will, this is high time for startups to actually revisit their strategy. So they have to clearly examine what is their positioning and what is their value proposition, which they started off with, and whether that will still continue to be relevant in the current scenario, or should they really seek some alternate positioning, or should they try to work again around their value proposition and kind of make it stronger so that they can survive these tough times and thrive post this scenario. Now, definitely there are opportunities for the startups who are not into innovation and not into actual product development to actually get into that and up themselves to the next level. And I'm saying this in the context of the current scenario, especially when most of the world is trying to, if I may use the word, economic distancing, trying to adopt economic distancing means with China. And one has to understand that today our Indian EV ecosystem is still dependent majority of its procurement on China.
Right.
be it the battery, be it the powertrain, even the power electronics to a significant extent. I think China is the source for all of these for most of the Indian startups. And therefore, it is very essential for them to really revisit their strategy and understand for themselves and make sure whether this strategy is something that can keep them alive in the market for the long term or not. And let us also not forget the fact that most of these startups have not yet started making money. They're all still bleeding. There are very few startups who have actually turned positive on their profitability. Therefore, I think this is a great opportunity for all the startups to revisit their positioning and value proposition and decide on the way forward. I think the moment they are able to get this right at this point of time, I think these startups have got a much longer life in the automotive industry.
Yes, I agree about the need to rejig. For example, startups like micromobility startups like Yulu. So they had a very good value proposition, and they've been making a lot of rides every day, thousands of rides. So what now, because people are wary of using shared vehicles because that has been used by some other person, so they're doing a rejig in their business model and they're coming up with long-term rentals of their scooters. So
Right, right, right.
so things like that, innovation and changes in your business models according to the public sentiment. So that will, I mean, apart from the OEMs in this space, there are other startups as well. They're component manufacturers. There are people who are assembling batteries by importing the cells, and of course, micro mobility providers, cargo rentals for home deliveries. So everybody will need to revisit in the face of this crisis and accordingly adjust, right?
Right. I think my response was more generic, which is largely applicable to the entire startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
However, the specific actions will obviously differ. Let's say between a OEM, or let's say a vehicle manufacturing startup versus a battery company or a powertrain company or a micro mobility company, or let's say someone who's into charging infrastructure. I think that the specific actions will obviously differ for different segments. But essentially, I would like to re-emphasize that revisiting the strategy and making sure that their positioning and value proposition are intact to the need of the hour is very essential for the startups to survive.
Right, of course. So so there is the newfound vigor on Atmanirbharta and vocal for local. So I think that also, I mean, at least in theory, that places a lot of emphasis on being self-sufficient, having supply chains closer to home. But when we
Yes.
talk about EVs, all those supply chains, as you said, they are largely dependent on China. And at this time, that is sort of reshaping globalization as we've known it. Companies are deterring from building large supply chain dependencies, especially on China. So this presents a good
Right.
opportunity for the component manufacturers to, double down on their efforts and actually make sure that at least the power electronics components and the motors can be, India can be a big factory for all of these and maybe supply to the world.
Yeah. See, this is a phenomenal opportunity for India. One clearly now, if we look at the recent announcement made by the government in terms of limitations or restrictions on investments directly coming into India from the bordering countries,
Yes.
well, it was a very well sandwiched kind of a statement. But essentially, if we look at it, majority of the chunk of investment come from China, and Chinese money has been funding a lot of Indian startups, so to say, in the last 3 to 5 years. However, the good news is for the EV ecosystem or in the EV ecosystem, most of the startups are actually funded by our Indian entrepreneurs.
Right.
There's very little Chinese money in the EV segment. So that's good news on one end. So at least I believe that with the kind of measures that the government has taken so far, and I'm expecting few more measures at least oriented towards the automotive industry if the industry has to survive. I think the ability of our Indian entrepreneurs to actually shell out cash for the startups to invest in growth areas will be better, and definitely our EV ecosystem will be in safer hands. However, having said that, on the procurement side, we are largely dependent on China, and therefore this is a great opportunity for each of our manufacturers to revisit their procurement strategies. Essentially, if you look at it, battery is one of the significant components in the overall electric vehicle, and China has been dominating that space. Now, if you look at the overall, let's say the distribution of the battery ecosystem across the globe, see, the source of battery comes from the mines. The metals come from the mine. So if you look at lithium, which is the most important ingredient in the battery, now there are two different sources of lithium. So one is brine, which is essentially a liquid salty water, which is available underneath the Earth's surface, which is extracted, and similar to the way salt is produced from seawater, lithium is extracted. So lithium salts are extracted from the brine. So the brine is actually taken out, it is put in evaporation ponds and processed. So post evaporation, then there is a filtration and a separation process that happens, through which essentially you get lithium carbonate. And then the lithium carbonate is converted to lithium hydroxide, which becomes the input for manufacturing the cathode. Similarly, you have another source for lithium, which is hard rock. So essentially, it is spodumene, which is currently the most widespread rock available across the globe. So from spodumene, you again process the rock, you convert it into, so you basically grind it, and then through a flotation process, try and filter it and extract lithium hydroxide from spodumene. So again, that lithium hydroxide is basically the ingredient that goes into manufacturing the cathode. And at this stage, you have other metals like cobalt, manganese, aluminum, or nickel, which get added depending on the cathode chemistry, and the cathode is manufactured. Now, when you look at the spread of these lithium mines, especially, I'm just trying to give an overall idea of how the battery manufacturing ecosystem works. So if you look at the spread of these lithium mines, essentially the lithium chemicals are largely concentrated around China, Chile, and or largely controlled by China, Chile, and Argentina. So more than 90% of the world's sources of lithium chemicals are controlled by China, Chile, and Argentina. Then move one step further, the cobalt availability. Again, China and Finland account for more than 75% of the cobalt availability in the world. Graphite, which is one of the most important ingredients in the battery manufacturing, is largely controlled by China. There is hardly anyone across the globe who's got a reasonably strong presence in graphite other than China. And surprisingly, nickel is one element wherein the Southeast Asian countries have a reasonably good command. So around close to 45 to 50% of the nickel supplies of the world are controlled, let's say, by Indonesia and Philippines. These are the top two countries in terms of nickel. Now, this is on the metal availability. And now if you look at the overall ecosystem or the value chain of the battery manufacturers, the mining and the metal availability is there in one part of the world. Then the cathode and anode, or let's say the battery cell manufacturing, happens in one part of the world. Then the cell assembly happens in different parts of the world. And this is more closer to the end applications or closer to the OEMs. And then post the cell assembly, then the modules are assembled, and then the battery packs are assembled. Now, the reason why there is a lot of complexity in this industry is because each and every stage of the value chain happens in a different part of the globe. And for India today, India has zero presence in any of the metals that are required for battery manufacturing. And India doesn't have the technology that is required to manufacture the cells. So these are the two biggest constraints for India. Now, if you look at the entire value chain of an electric vehicle, there are two things that determine the efficiency, reliability, and competitiveness of an electric vehicle. So it is the battery and the powertrain. So the entire power pack of the electric vehicle is the most crucial. So it is the heart, and the power electronics is the brain for the vehicle. Now, for the power pack, the most important thing is the combination of battery and the propulsion system that you use in the vehicle. That is the most critical thing which gives you your efficiency and reliability for the vehicle. And the right choice of, so there are multiple battery technologies available, and there are multiple technologies in propulsion systems that are available. And one has to really know what is the best combination of a battery technology and a propulsion system technology for a given vehicle, considering the nature of the vehicle and its application. Now this is the most important part of electric vehicle manufacturing. Now, I'll come back to the statement that I made earlier in the context of the Indian EV startups. Most of our Indian startups are just, and majority of them are currently operating in the two-wheeler and the three-wheeler space. There's hardly any startup operating in the four-wheeler or the other segments. What most of the vehicles today flying on the Indian roads is just a combination of a battery and a powertrain or a propulsion system, and just assemble it, make sure that it runs, it has a minimum range required, and get the vehicle on the roads. This is the trend that I've generally been seeing. I'm not seeing, or I've not so far seen a really engineered, a good, well-engineered vehicle on the roads. So therefore, if this is the scenario, where is the possibility for our Indian manufacturers to actually preserve the value in the product offering? It is missing. So for India as a country, or for our Indian EV industry as an industry segment, I think the most important thing that we have to do is first make sure that we understand the EV technology and make sure that we know all the possible combinations of batteries and the propulsion systems, and be able to do a good engineered design of an electric vehicle. That is the first and foremost thing, which is very important, because that is what is, that is the thing that you show to your customers. You don't show them lithium, or you don't show them the battery or anything. You actually show a vehicle to your customer. So the vehicle has to be really appealing to the customer, and it has to be a good spokesperson of the technology that you have created in that vehicle. Then the second most important thing is the control on the supply chain, because that accounts for more than 70% of the total cost of the vehicle. So what kind of control we have on the supply chain? Now, if we look at the battery supply chain, we obviously have no control. At least on the propulsion systems, I would say that we have some companies in India who are already operating in that space, who are both into design as well as manufacturing of these propulsion systems. And therefore, I can say that at least there are those green shoots in the Indian ecosystem. But on battery, none. There are companies, for example, the Tata Group has got into a joint venture, and they are in the process of setting up a battery manufacturing facility. And I've also heard about different companies, Exide, Amar Raja Batteries, and a few other names who are in the process of exploring joint venture opportunities, or who have already done some joint ventures and are in the process of exploring where to invest, where to set up the facilities, and how to kind of scale it up. Recently, I believe even Niti Aayog has proposed to the Indian government that we should set up battery infrastructure of about 50 gigawatts or gigawatt hours of capacity in the country. And what is most important thing here is, while we are focusing on setting up the battery manufacturing infrastructure in India, it is very important for us to control the supply chain. If we do not have control on the supply chain, I think that will be a big disaster for us. So at the government level, I think we should try and leverage on our diplomatic relationships we have with other countries, and especially focus on countries like, let's say, the South American continent, Chile, Argentina, etc., where these lithium reserves are available in plenty, and try and enter into strategic partnerships for getting access to these materials, because supply chain reliability will definitely play a very important role in future in carving how the EV segment will take shape. So I think, to kind of summarize what I said, focus on design and creating a really engineered design based on technology of an electric vehicle is the first priority that the Indian ecosystem will have to focus upon. and then control on the supply chain through proper strategic partnerships is the key. And even in the supply chain, I think going forward, once the segment starts to evolve, OEMs will certainly like to have a vertically integrated setup wherein at least the tier 1 happens under their roof.
Okay.
And maybe for tier 2 and beyond, the way forward could be strategic partnerships. That's the way I see it taking shape.
Okay. So of course, India has to explore alternate sourcing opportunities for battery, raw materials, and of course, partnerships for technology as well. You know, companies that are already into or have developed technologies for cell manufacturing. So we need some kind of partnerships with those companies because we don't have the technology as we know it. Right.
Right.
So, Uday, I understand that you work closely with the consultancies in the lithium ion and mineral intelligence space, basically. So,
Yes.
give some insight into how the pricing trend of lithium, because of this COVID and other factors, how has that been shaping up, and what is your view going forward? How is the pricing trend going to change, and will that have an impact on the battery prices ultimately?
Yeah. So we have partnered with a company called Benchmark Mineral Intelligence, which is a UK-based boutique consulting firm, and they are one of the world leaders in the battery and the battery supply chain space. So they have a very good understanding of the entire battery supply chain and various battery technologies, and they have worked with almost all the battery manufacturers across the globe. So that's the kind of credentials and the gravitas that they bring to the table. So they have been looking at the market, and there's one more thing to mention about Benchmark. They are one of the recommended indices for lithium and the other rare earth metal pricing on the London Metal Commodity Index. So they actually publish on a regular basis the pricing trends of all the rare earth metals involved in the battery manufacturing, and they also try and get the supplier partners and the customers to enter into contracts based on a certain reference point. So the purchasing contracts naturally have to have some kind of a reference for price indexing. And a lot of companies actually refer to Benchmark Mineral Index for the rare earth metal pricing. So having said that, yes, they have been studying the market very closely for the last, I think they've been operating in this segment for more than 8 years now. And the price trends of lithium have been consistently decreasing for the last 3 years. Now, most of this can be attributed to one reason, that is discovering of more and more mines or more and more sources of lithium. Now there was one large source of lithium, a lithium mine based out of spodumene rock, which was discovered recently in Australia, and so there's also one more which is kind of coming up in North America now. So what has happened is so far the availability of lithium and the rate of production of lithium and the way in which the lithium capacities have been increasing until a year ago was somewhere bound to fall behind the EV growth, let's say by 2023 or 24. However, with the discovery of these mines and also economies of scale coming into play, this thing eventually led to decrease in the lithium prices. But I believe that, with whatever intelligence we have from our partners, Benchmark, we strongly feel that in the next 2 to 3 years, the prices will probably increase a little bit and they will settle at a new normal. Now, we have to understand one thing, Priyashi, that lithium extraction so far was predominantly required for the electronics industry. And one of the largest consumer of lithium has been, the batteries for the telephone, the mobile phone applications. So if we look at it going forward, the way the EV industry evolution is being projected, let's say by 2025 or 27 or 2030, the total out of the total consumption of lithium, it looks like hardly the existing segments which are non-automotive will not account for more than 5% of the total consumption of lithium.
I see.
So if you look at this trend, there is a lot of catch up that the lithium mines will have to do in terms of meeting these requirements. However, in the last 2 years, these new mines that have got discovered have suddenly expanded the capacity so much that it has also led to reduction in the prices. But going forward, economies of scale will certainly come into play, and the battery prices are definitely going to reduce going forward. And however, the prices of lithium will probably increase a little bit and settle at a new normal. So far, there has never been a normal that has got stabilized on lithium pricing. It has always been fluctuating, and for the last 3-4 years, it's just been on a continuously declining trend. So I think in the next 2 years, we believe that there's a new normal that will get established for the lithium price. And that has also been one of the other factors bothering some of the mining companies to invest further, because when the prices are reducing so drastically, the returns on their investments are being subject to question. So they are also in a fix in terms of how to go about it, how much to invest, when to invest. And I think all these questions are still bothering the minds of these people. And one more thing which we also have to look at is, when you look at the growth of the electric vehicle population across the globe, 2019 has been a very bad year. I think 2019, the population of electric vehicles across the globe hasn't increased by more than 6 or 7%. Okay. So I think 18, if I remember correctly, the total number of vehicles sold were close to 2 million vehicles, and 19, the figures were about 2.2 million. So yeah, it's about 10% growth. Whereas in the previous years, year on year, the volumes almost kept doubling, tripling, or quadrupling every year. And for the first time, the volume kind of shrunk, and it just registered a modest growth of 10%. One of the reasons is withdrawal of the subsidies by China, and China accounts for more than 70% of the total EV market across the globe today. So the moment the subsidies kind of phased out in China, the market in China also fell by more than 30 to 40%, and that also had an impact on the overall global markets. However, definitely in future, excluding the COVID impact, which will probably last for another 9 to 12 months, the volumes will certainly increase, and every country has got aggressive plans of electrification of their mobility, and most of them are doing it in the context of the climate change commitments that they have made at a global level. And even for India, I think the EV segment will certainly it will have a twofold benefit for us. One, it will clearly reduce the kind of import bills that we are facing on crude, and secondly, it will kind of help us to create a much more cleaner country. So the battery prices, coming back to the point, will certainly drop, and from today's levels, I think once the economies of scale start setting in, I think the prices should drop by more than 50% of what it is today.
I see.
So that should definitely give a kind of a boost to the industry.
Yes. Okay. Well, I think we are almost, the time is out. So, and I think we've covered most of the topics that we presented in the outline of the session. So thank you so much, Uday, for sharing your insights with us. This has been a very meaningful learning session for me, and it was great to know your perspective on the EV industry. And for our audience, please let us know in the comment section what topics particularly would you like to know about next, and maybe Uday and I can specifically pick that topic and discuss that. So thank you so much. Thank you, Uday, once again.
Thank you, Priyakshi. I think it was a pleasure interacting on this forum, and yeah, I just tried to capture in bits and pieces whatever little information I could show it given the limited time that we have. But yes, I'm sure we will be able to have more detailed conversations on specific subjects because I think each subject in the entire value chain of the electric vehicle demands special attention, and I'm sure we'll be able to discuss a little more detail once we speak on specific aspects of each of the value chain.
Yes.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure being on the discussion with you, and look forward.
Thanks, Uday. Bye-bye. Take care.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.